All right, so here we go. Let's start with programming and let's begin how to program a server and a client. Okay, now I'm going to teach you first how you're going to create a client in Python. How to create a client in Python, of course. So I'm going to save this file in IoT Basics. I'm going to save that as client.py. So I'm going to save that as client.py. I'm going to close everything else for now. I'm not interested. All right, I'm going to close everything, and as and when we require it, I'll switch them on. Okay, so pulse width. Okay, pulse width is done. We are now entering into a new, completely new. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just erase all of this out. Okay, this is just to explain. So I'm going to create a client in Python. Now, for creating a client socket, I need to create a client socket. So creating a client socket in Python, okay, requires a few steps, right? Let me say, to be specific, I think it's 4 or 5. Let's have a look. Step number 1. So I'm going to write here step number 1. What is step number 1? It is creating a socket itself. Creating a socket, and then a client socket. For making it a client, it has some more things to be done. Creating a socket. Number 1, I need to create a socket, which means I create the socket by doing 2 things. One is I need to use the socket library. Creating a socket, it is done by using the socket library or the socket module. But not just the library, I need to use in this particular library. Okay, to be specific, this particular library, socket library, has a class called as socket. So I have to use the socket class in the socket library. Okay, I have to use the socket class in the socket library to create a socket, creating a socket object. I need to create a socket object. Okay, so I'm going to do this. First is I'm going to import the socket library or the socket module. I'm going to import socket. But in this particular socket module, using this particular module, in this module, there is a particular class called as socket, which can be used in order to create the particular socket object, which means if it is creating a socket object, you need to save it in a particular variable, or you need to save it in a particular object. Let me call it as mysock. Mysock is equal to socket.socket. So I'm creating a socket object using mysock. All right, so this is step 1 about creating a client socket in Python. Step 2, after creating a client socket, the next thing that I need to do is after creating a client socket, the next thing that I need to do is I need to connect to the, what do you say? I need to connect to the server. So I need to connect to the server. Now we have a problem. What is the problem? The problem is I don't have a server currently. I'm just creating a client. I don't have a server. Oh, that's sad. You don't have a server. So if you do not have a server, there is this, the only other, you may think the only other option is let's create a new server, right? The option that you would think of is, okay, create a new file and write a server.py. No. I don't want to create a server soon because I don't want to mess up both client and server. So what I want to do is basically, if somebody could provide me a ready-made server at a particular port, then my client side is easy. I just need to connect to that particular server at a particular port using the IP address and the port number. Yes or no? Yes, there is an application. If you open the terminal, there is an application called as Netcat. NC. Okay, there's an application called as Netcat. Netcat, what does it do? Netcat is an application which can be used for creating a server by writing -l, netcat space -l. -l means listen. So the server is going to listen, or it is going to be launched at a particular port. So the port number needs to be specified. Let's say the port is 1234. Enter. So Netcat is going to listen at port number 1234. And it is listening. It is waiting. Now comes the question. Okay, so if it is waiting and if it is listening, okay, when will my Python code, when will it, it needs to connect to me and it needs to talk to me. So if the Python code should talk to me, it should know my IP address and port number. Port number, so it knows. So it is there. The port number is 1234. But what does the computer, or what does my Python code doesn't know? It does not know what is the IP address. What should be the IP address of the server? Can you tell me what is the IP address of the server? The IP address of the server is the Raspberry Pi itself, is the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. So if I open a new window, if I open a new terminal, and if I write ifconfig, what is the IP address of the server? It is this one, 192.168.3.100. That itself is the IP address of the server. But there is a problem. Okay, when you write, and the client is another application, is a Python application, which you are writing here. This particular client is an application which is going to ping the server, which is on the same computer.